Marissa Cole stood in front of the judge and called me a failure with such perfect composure that 3 people in the gallery actually nodded along. He inherited nothing, she said, because he built nothing. My husband is a man who coasted through his own father's decline waiting for a check that was never going to come. I found someone who actually provides. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't need to. Everyone in that courtroom already believed her, because for 4 years I had let them. What none of them knew, not Marissa, not her attorney, not the man she'd already moved into our old house, was that 11 days earlier, a courier had delivered a sealed envelope to my apartment from a law firm in Charleston. My father had died 9 months before that. Quietly, the way he'd lived the last decade of his life. Everyone assumed his estate was modest. Everyone assumed wrong. That envelope was still sitting, unopened, in my glove compartment the morning Marissa stood up and told a judge I was worth nothing. She was about to find out exactly how wrong that sentence was. To understand how I ended up sitting silent in that courtroom while my own wife dismantled my character in front of strangers, you have to go back 6 years, to the spring my father, Walter Cole, sold Cole Precision Fabrication, the machine shop he'd built from a single rented bay in 1979 into a 140-employee manufacturing company that supplied parts to 3 different aerospace contractors. He sold it to a private holding group for a number that never appeared in any local paper, because my father structured the deal specifically so it wouldn't. He'd spent 40 years watching what money did to people in our small town, the cousins who resurfaced, the church friends who suddenly needed a loan, the one former business partner who tried to sue him twice over nothing, hoping he'd settle just to make the headache go away. When the sale closed, my father didn't buy a bigger house. He didn't buy a boat. He moved the entire proceeds into a private family trust managed by an estate attorney named Harold Voss, a man who had drafted every legal document my father ever signed since 1985, and who understood exactly what silence was worth. To the town, Walter Cole was a machinist who'd sold his shop and retired comfortably. To me, he was my father, a man who still wore the same brand of work boots until the soles cracked, who ate lunch at the same diner every day for 30 years, and who, when I asked him directly what the business sold for, looked at me and said, "Enough that you never need to know the number until it matters." Knowing it early only invites people into your life who care more about the number than they care about you. I was 28 then. I thought I understood what he meant. I didn't. Not really, not until years later. I met Marissa 2 years after the sale at a fundraising dinner I'd only attended because a college friend dragged me along. She was ambitious, magnetic, the kind of woman who filled a room without raising her voice. She worked in commercial real estate development, closing deals that made the local business journal, and she had exactly the kind of hunger that made people assume she'd go far. I liked that about her. I liked watching her work a room. To Marissa and to nearly everyone in her orbit, I was Ethan Cole, a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm. Steady, unremarkable, a man who drove a 6-year-old sedan and split the check on dates without a second thought. I never told her my father had sold his company for a sum I myself didn't fully know until much later. I never told her about the trust, partly because my father had drilled a kind of discretion into me since childhood, and partly, if I'm honest, because I wanted to know if she'd have chosen me without it. For the first 2 years, I told myself she had. The cracks started small, the way they usually do. Marissa's career accelerated fast. She made junior partner at her firm, then started closing deals directly with developers 3 times her age. And somewhere in that acceleration, I started noticing the way she introduced me at industry events. "This is Ethan, my husband," delivered fast, followed immediately by a change of subject. Like my name was a formality she needed to clear before the real conversation could begin. I didn't carry a title she could brag about. I didn't produce a number she could compare against her own. And when a senior partner at her firm named Grant Delacroix started mentoring her, fly her out to conferences, introducing her to investors, taking credit, I'd later learn, for deals she built entirely herself, I watched her begin measuring me against him. She never said it outright. She didn't have to. I heard it in the way she stopped asking what I thought about her deals. I saw it in the way dinner conversations shifted entirely toward Grant's opinions on the market, Grant's connections, Grant's vision. I told myself I was imagining it, I was wrong about that, too. My father died in February in his sleep, in the same modest ranch house he'd lived in since before I was born. The funeral was small, old employees, men who'd worked the floor of his shop for 20 years, the diner waitress who'd serve him coffee every morning for a decade. Marissa came. She stood beside me in black, held my hand at the graveside, and 3 weeks later told me, almost gently, that she thought we should start being honest about where this marriage was going. I didn't understand yet what she meant. I found out 4 days later when she filed. The petition described me the way you describe a tenant behind on rent. It stated that I had failed to meaningfully contribute to the household's financial growth throughout the marriage, that I had relied on Marissa's income to maintain our lifestyle. And this was the part that actually made me sit down at the kitchen table and read it twice, that given my father's recent passing, my lack of any independent estate, she was entitled to the overwhelming majority of what the filing called our marital assets, including the house, which had been purchased in full 6 years earlier, with money that had never come from her account. She either didn't know that, or she was betting I couldn't prove it. I called Harold Voss that same afternoon. He'd handled my father's affairs for nearly 40 years, and in the 9 months since the funeral, he'd been quietly walking me through the settlement of the estate, an estate whose full scope I still hadn't grasped because Harold had insisted, per my father's explicit instructions, on releasing it to me in careful, deliberate stages. There's a sealed document, Harold told me, that your father asked me to hold until a specific set of conditions were met. He was very precise about this, Ethan. He didn't want it opened prematurely. What conditions? He wanted it delivered to you the moment you faced what he called a test of character from someone close to you. His words, not mine. I know that sounds theatrical. Your father was not a theatrical man, so when he asked for this, I listened carefully. Harold paused. I think, given what you just told me about the divorce filing, this qualifies. The envelope arrived by courier 2 days later. I didn't open it. I told myself I would once I understood what I was actually walking into. I put it in my glove compartment and drove to my first meeting with a divorce attorney, a sharp, unhurried woman named Priya Anand, who had been recommended by a co-worker for exactly one reason. She didn't lose. Before we discuss strategy, Priya said, looking over the petition, I need you to be completely honest with me about your financial position. All of it, because your wife's filing describes someone with essentially no assets, and I need to know if that's accurate before we build a defense around it. I thought about my father's voice. Enough that you never need to know the number until it matters. I don't fully know, I admit it, but I don't think it's accurate. The mediation session took place 3 weeks later in a downtown conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Marissa arrived with 2 attorneys and Grant Delacroix seated beside her, not as counsel, just present. The way a man sits beside someone when he's already decided the outcome belongs to him. Her lead attorney opened with a prepared narrative. An ambitious, self-made woman who had financially carried an underachieving husband for years, now finally choosing to build a future with someone who matched her trajectory. Then Marissa spoke directly to me, her voice calm and final. Sign over the house and the joint accounts. Ethan, I don't want this to be ugly, but I built everything we have, and I think deep down you know that. I looked at her across the table and thought about 6 years of watching her build her career, flagging contract risks she'd missed before her own team caught them, quietly covering the mortgage payment the 1 year her bonus came in late without ever mentioning it, sitting up with her until 2 a.m. the night before her biggest pitch, running numbers she was too exhausted to run herself. None of that would matter today. I understood that now. Priya set a single folder on the table. Before assets are discussed, I'd like the record to reflect the origin of the Willow Creek property. We're prepared to submit full documentation of the purchase at the court's convenience. Marissa's attorney smiled, unbothered. We'll look forward to reviewing it. Marissa didn't smile. She looked at me the way you look at something you've already filed away as finished. In the elevator afterward, Priya asked quietly, Do you want to release the full financial picture now? We could likely resolve this in days. Not yet, I said. I want to understand what I'm actually holding first. That night, in my mother-in-law's guest room, the only place I had to stay after Marissa asked me to leave for both our sakes, I finally opened the envelope from Harold Voss. Inside was a single letter in my father's handwriting, and beneath it, a certified copy of an estate document I hadn't known existed. Ethan, if you're reading this, someone close to you has shown you exactly who they are, and I'm sorry I'm not there to help you through it. I built the Cole family trust the year I sold the shop, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust the world around you. Money changes how people look at a person. I wanted you to be loved, if you were ever going to be loved, before anyone knew what came with you. The trust holds the full proceeds of the sale, along with the mineral and property rights I never let anyone know I've been quietly acquiring since 1994 across 3 counties. Land nobody thought was worth anything until the energy companies came asking 12 years later. Harold has the full accounting. It is substantial, son, more than either of us ever discussed out loud. I asked Harold to release this to you only when you needed it most, not simply when you wanted it. If you're opening this because someone tried to convince a courtroom or convince you that you came from nothing and are worth nothing, I want you to walk back into that room and let the truth speak for itself. Don't shout it. Don't perform it. Just let it be true and watch what happens to people who bet against you. I love you. I always believed in you long before there was a number attached to why. Dad. I sat in that guest room for a long time. Then I called Harold. I need the full accounting, I said, and I need you in the courtroom when this goes to trial. I've been ready for that call for 9 months, Ethan, Harold said. Your father knew this day might come. He just hoped it wouldn't. The first article ran 2 weeks later. Not about me, about Marissa. A local business journal profile praised her for moving forward after what it delicately called a difficult and disappointing marriage, and quoted an anonymous source close to the couple describing me as someone who had never really kept pace with her ambition. I recognized Grant's fingerprints on that quote immediately. Marissa didn't deny it in her own interview, a short piece for a regional lifestyle segment where she sat in a blazer I recognized and talked, briefly, about the exhaustion of carrying a household financially while your partner watches from the sidelines. I watched the clip once. I didn't need to watch it twice. What Marissa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, since I'd never told her, was that the Willow Creek house we lived in for 6 years had never actually been purchased with our joint funds. My father's trust had bought it outright the year before Marissa and I even met, held it under a holding LLC, and quietly financed what looked like our mortgage payments through a management entity that reimbursed the joint account every single month. Marissa had genuinely believed she was paying for that house. She had been living, unknowingly, inside a structure that existed specifically to protect a life she didn't yet know I had. On the 9th day after that article ran, a reporter showed up outside my mother's assisted living facility asking residents about the husband from the Cole divorce case. My mother, 71 years old and sharper than most people half her age, reportedly told the young man, "My son is worth more than you'll ever understand, and not for the reason you think," before closing the door in his face. When I called her that night to apologize, she cut me off immediately. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "I've outlived worse gossip than this. Focus on what's in front of you, Ethan. Your father didn't build what he built, so you could spend your energy being embarrassed." 2 days later, Marissa's attorney filed a sworn financial declaration on her behalf, asserting under penalty of perjury that the Willow Creek property and all joint accounts had been acquired entirely through her income during the marriage. Every word of it was false. I later learned Grant had personally walked her through signing it, framing it as standard procedure to strengthen her position before depositions. What he hadn't told her, what maybe he didn't fully understand himself, was that Grant had also, over the preceding 8 months, been quietly steering 3 of Marissa's biggest development deals through a shell entity he partially controlled, skimming margin off contracts she thought she was closing clean. Priya's investigators found a pattern almost by accident, chasing something unrelated. Marissa had no idea. Not yet. The deposition took place on the 14th floor of Marissa's attorney's office building. She arrived composed, certain, ready. Priya opened with routine questions, career timeline, the shape of our finances as Marissa understood them. Then Priya asked whether I had ever meaningfully contributed to household decisions or financial planning during the marriage. "No," Marissa said. "Ethan never had anything real to contribute. He worked a modest job and lived comfortably off what I built." Priya opened a folder. I'd like to direct your attention to a series of wire transfers into your firm's escrow account for the Baxter Ridge development, dated 14 months ago. Are you aware these transfers originated from an entity called Cole Family Holdings? Marissa glanced at her attorney. I don't recognize that name. Cole Family Holdings is a subsidiary of the Cole Family Trust, Priya said evenly, which is wholly controlled by your husband. That entity provided the bridge financing that allowed your firm to close the Baxter Ridge deal after your original lender withdrew. Were you aware of that? The room went very still. Marissa's eyes moved to me, searching for something, a denial, a joke, anything that would put the floor back where it had been a moment ago. I didn't give her one. That's not possible, she said finally, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. Ethan doesn't have that kind of money. Mrs. Cole, Priya said, would it change your understanding of this marriage if I told you your husband is the sole beneficiary and controlling party of family trust currently valued, per certified accounting, at just over $320 million? Marissa laughed, but it came out wrong, thin at the edges. This is ridiculous. Ethan, tell them this is ridiculous. I looked at her for the first time since the deposition had started. I'm not going to do that, Marissa. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not comprehension yet, just the first edge of a floor giving way. For days before trial, two things happened that nearly derailed everything Priya and Harold had built. The first, a former junior associate at Grant's firm who had agreed to testify about the shell entity skimming margin off Marissa's deals suddenly withdrew his statement, citing personal reasons, less than an hour after Grant was seen entering the man's apartment building. Priya's team couldn't reach him again. The second, a secure drive containing 18 months of reconstructed financial records, proof of the Baxter Ridge Bridge financing, proof of the Willow Creek reimbursement structure, the entire paper trail tying the Cole Family Trust to both my marriage and Marissa's business, went missing from a locked file room at Harold's office. No forced entry. Someone with legitimate access had taken it. Harold called me that night, his voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. We can rebuild most of it from secondary sources, but it will take time we don't have before Thursday. And without that drive, our documentation on the bridge financing is thinner than I'd like walking into a courtroom. I stood in my mother's kitchen, in the house I'd grown up visiting on weekends, and thought about my father's letter. Don't shout it. Just let it be true. What's Grant's next move if he knows we're close? I asked. If he believes the trust's involvement in Baxter Ridge becomes public record, Harold said, his own exposure on the skimming becomes public too. He has every incentive to bury this before Thursday, one way or another. Then we don't wait for Thursday to be ready, I said. We call the district attorney's fraud division tonight, and we let them find what he's hiding on their own timeline, not his. It took 2 days, 3 subpoenas, and one very determined forensic accountant named Dolores Fenn to reconstruct enough of the record independently, this time backed by law enforcement rather than a private legal team alone, to make the missing drive irrelevant. Grant hadn't just skimmed margin off Marissa's deals. He'd falsified 2 independent appraisals to justify it, a detail that turned a private financial dispute into something with real criminal weight. The courtroom was full by the time the trial opened, thanks in no small part to the coverage Marissa's team had courted over the preceding weeks. The narrative they'd built, the self-made woman finally free of a husband who'd never kept pace, had taken on a life of its own. Reporters filled the back rows. Grant sat 2 seats behind Marissa, composed, unaware yet of what was already moving toward him from a different direction entirely. Marissa's attorney opened with a polished account of our marriage, and then Marissa took the stand herself, steady and certain, describing years of carrying our household alone, describing me in a language of quiet disappointment. He had no real income to speak of, she said, no meaningful assets. I built everything we had on my own, and I'm proud of that. Priya rose. She didn't raise her voice. She rarely needed to. Mrs. Cole, you testified that the Willow Creek property was purchased with funds from your income. Is that correct? Yes. Priya handed a document to the clerk. This is the original title record for Willow Creek. The purchase date is 7 years ago, 1 full year before you and Mr. Cole were married. The registered owner is Cole Family Holdings, a subsidiary of the Cole Family Trust. Your name does not appear on this document. It never has. The gallery stirred. Marissa's attorney was already reaching for his notepad. "The mortgage payments came from our joint account," Marissa said, her voice tightening. "I paid that mortgage every month for 6 years. Those deposits," Priya said, "were reimbursements from a property management entity funded entirely by your husband's trust. The account was never paying a mortgage in the way you believed, Mrs. Cole. It was reimbursing itself." Priya then submitted the trust documentation, certified, audited, signed by 3 independent trustees, establishing me as a sole beneficiary in an estate exceeding $300 million. The room did not stir this time. It went completely silent. I watched Grant shift in his seat, the first crack in his own composure. Judge Alvarez looked over the documents for a long moment before turning to Marissa. "Mrs. Cole, you submitted a sworn financial declaration asserting these assets originated from your personal income. In light of what has just been presented, do you wish to revisit that declaration?" Marissa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Priya wasn't finished. She called Dolores Fenn, who walked the court to the reconstructed record of the Baxter Ridge Bridge financing, the falsified appraisals, and shell entity through which Grant had been quietly skimming margin off deals Marissa believed she closed entirely on her own. 2 investigators from the district attorney's fraud division, seated near the gallery entrance, moved toward Grant before Dolores had even finished her testimony. He was arrested in the courtroom. The charges read aloud in flat procedural language: fraud, falsification of business records, witness intimidation, obstruction. Marissa sat very still through all of it. I think somewhere in that hour, she finally understood what Grant had actually been doing, not just to the case, but to her career, to her trust, to the version of herself she'd built her entire self-image around. He had used her, positioned her at the center of something engineered to leave her exposed the moment it collapsed, all while letting her believe she was the one steering it. I felt no satisfaction watching her understand that. I felt something quieter. The particular weight of watching someone you once loved realize how completely they'd been used by someone they trusted more than they'd ever trusted me. Judge Alvarez delivered her rulings before the session closed. The Willow Creek property was confirmed as premarital, separate trust property. Marissa held no legal claim to it. The joint accounts were reviewed against the documented evidence of their true origin and reclassified accordingly. Because Marissa's sworn declaration was now confirmed to contain material falsehoods, though the fabricated financial records themselves had been Grant's doing, not hers. The judge referred her filing to the district attorney's office for review, while noting her cooperation with investigators in the following weeks would weigh in her favor. She was not charged. I hadn't wanted that outcome, and I told Priya, so directly, what Marissa had genuinely earned during our marriage, her salary, her legitimate savings, her share of anything built honestly, remained hers. What she had tried to take, that was never hers to begin with, she would not receive. That was the only line I asked anyone to draw. In the corridor afterward, Marissa approached me alone, her attorneys trailing several steps behind. "I didn't know," she said, "about any of it. Grant, the money, all of it. I thought I understood what was happening, and I was wrong about nearly everything." I looked at her for a long moment. 6 years doesn't disappear because it ends badly. I understood that. But something stayed true no matter how much you wish they weren't. "I believe you didn't know about Grant," I said. "But you called me worthless in a courtroom before you knew anything about what I actually had. You didn't need a number to decide I wasn't worth taking seriously. Marissa, you decided that a long time before this trial ever started." I held her gaze. "I'm not angry about the money. I'm not even angry about Grant. I'm sorry you spent 6 years next to someone you never actually saw." She didn't answer. I hadn't expected her to. I walked back toward Harold without waiting for a response. Marissa's firm placed her on leave within the month, once the extent of Grant's fraud, and her firm's own exposure to it, became public. She rebuilt slowly, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, taking a smaller role at a different company 2 states away. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. A year later, I stood at the back of a converted warehouse in the same town where my father had built his machine shop for the opening of the first Cole Family Trust Workforce Center, a program funding trade apprenticeships for young people who couldn't otherwise afford the training. built on the same floor where my father had once employed 140 machinists who trusted him with their livelihoods for decades. My mother stood at the podium. She declined the speech Harold offered to help her write, and instead spoke from a single index card she barely glanced at, telling the room that she'd watched her son spend most of his adult life choosing to be known by what he did rather than what he had, and that she'd never once been embarrassed by that choice. Not even a day a reporter showed up asking about the husband from the Cole case. She got a laugh on that line. She'd timed it perfectly. I stood at the back of that room and thought about my father's letter, still folded in the drawer of my desk. Let the truth speak for itself. Watch what happens to the people who bet against you. A young reporter caught me on the steps outside afterward. Recorder held at an uncertain angle. Mr. Cole, you could have disclosed everything the moment your wife called you a failure in that courtroom. Why did you wait? I thought about the honest answer, about the decade my father spent teaching me that the wrong kind of attention costs more than it's worth, about watching him lose, the ability, near the end of his life, to tell the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved his balance sheet. Some people will only respect you once they know what you're worth. I said, but when that's how it works, they were never respecting you. They were respecting the number. I needed to know for certain which one I was married to. I looked back through the open doors, where my mother was still talking with a small crowd of young apprentices, laughing at something one of them had said. Now I know, I said, and I can live with that. I walked down the steps into the afternoon light. The trial was over. The walls I'd spent years building were down for good. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have anything left to hide, which turned out to feel less like exposure and far more like finally stepping outside after too many years spent indoors.